Morning, everybody. This is Jeff here with Oak Ridge Student Ministries, and it's actually Jeff from the future. We've taken a 3-lesson break to be reminded of what Easter and resurrection of Jesus means to each one of us. But we're about to jump back in to our Do Something series, our series on injustice. And before we started, I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of what we have talked about before we jump into our last week about injustice. In week 1, we learned that before you do something about injustice, you have to see it. In week 2, we learned that when you experience injustice, you don't have to face it alone. And in week 3, we learned that God is doing something about injustice. So I'm going to throw to past me, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction and a reminder of what we've talked about in the past couple of weeks. We are jumping into week 4 of our Do Something series. In the last week, we're going to talk about injustice. And this week, we're going to look at how we do something. And I want to start with a quick question for you. And that is, how many of you have ever gotten lost? If you've ever gotten lost before, you might have found yourself in a moment asking, what am I supposed to do now? When you're lost, you want to do something to make the situation better or figure out where you're supposed to be. But at times you feel a little helpless, like you don't know where to turn next. I think we all feel that way sometimes. That moment of, what am I supposed to do now? Do I keep walking this way? Do I walk this way? Do I just sit and wait? For me, that's usually how I feel when we talk about injustice. Remember, injustices are the things in our world that seem unfair, unequal, or just not right. They're the kinds of things that happen to us or to other people that make us think somebody should do something about that. And as we've learned over the last few weeks, not only does God care about injustice, but He calls us to work with Him to help bring justice. He challenges us to do something about it, to be part of the work He's doing to make things right. And while that's really cool and even an exciting challenge, I think if we're honest, it's also a little overwhelming. For starters, we sometimes feel like there's not a lot we can do about the injustices we see in the world. When we see big problems like poverty, racism, hunger, unequal treatment of people, cruelty, crime, well, those things just feel like part of a never-ending battle against injustice. And in times, it truly feels like we can't solve big problems like these. Maybe you feel that way sometimes too. Maybe you look at the injustices in the world and feel just a little helpless and hopeless. They've always happened, and they're still happening. So, can there even be hope that they won't happen? Is there anything we can do to change them? All of that, I totally get it. Because you're right, standing up and doing something about injustice isn't easy. It's overwhelming, and it is something that feels like somebody bigger, stronger, older, or more powerful should be doing. It feels like something somebody needs to do something about, right? Well, here's what I want you to know today. You are somebody. And whether you realize it or not, I believe that you could be the somebody to start doing something and keep doing something about the injustices that you see and care about in the world around you. To help us out here, I want to talk about a guy named James. What's interesting about James is that he was actually the half-brother of Jesus. After Jesus died and came back to life, James became a leader of the early church. During that time, James wrote a letter to a group of Christians who were facing injustice in their world. And James wanted to encourage and challenge them. He did this by saying in James 2:15 and 16, "Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm, and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? Okay, so that sounds a little bit harsh. James was basically saying, hey, when you see an injustice, you have to do more than just offer a few words and walk away. You have to do more than just hope it changes. If you don't do anything to actually try and help, what good is it? I think this bold statement stings a little bit, because if we're honest, that's what we're all tempted to do sometimes. When we face the hugeness of a problem that we don't know how to solve, we often just settle for simple words over actual actions. We join the hundreds or thousands or even millions of people waiting for and praying for somebody to actually do something. And if we're the ones hurting, sometimes we even give up hope that something can or will actually happen to make it right. But in that, we miss the opportunity God may be giving us to be part of the answer, to be that somebody who can do something. James went on to explain that as followers of Jesus, our response to injustice is directly connected to our faith. In James 2, verse 17, he said, "In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." James was saying here that our faith and our actions are connected. If we say we have faith, but it doesn't motivate us to do something, then something about our faith is dead. And here's why that's a big deal. Living a life of faith is about becoming more and more like Jesus. And even if you've missed every part of this series so far, here's what I want you to always remember. When it comes to injustice, Jesus is always doing something. And when we make that shift to allow our prayers and words turn into actions, we are becoming more like the person we're praying to. We're becoming more like Jesus himself. The things that make you feel sad or angry, that you know aren't right, those things are wrongs in the world that God wants to see made right. And he created you and me to be the somebodies to do something about it. Not just to talk about it, but to be about it, to act on it, and to keep acting as a reflection of our faith in God, who cares about injustice. Then, others around us can see the God who cares about injustice too. When it comes to injustice, never stop doing something. It may feel overwhelming, like our little actions won't have any effect on such giant problems. But small changes are still that, changes. And they're changes in the right direction. God tells us in his word that no matter how long the fight is, no matter how hard the battle is, we aren't to give up. The Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people." Don't get weary when you're doing good, Paul said. In other words, don't give up. Don't give in when the good work gets hard. Instead, keep going, keep working, keep fighting. Do you remember the dominoes that we have here from last week? We started setting up a domino path to show us how we can do something when it comes to injustice. We have the power to set off, and this is everyone's favorite part of dominoes, a chain reaction when it comes to fighting injustice. But we can't take action without setting things up first. See, a few weeks ago we started looking at the fact that before we can take action, we have to see the injustices in the world around us. And we've learned that God is doing something about injustice by using each of us. Today, we're reminded of another important thing when it comes to injustice, that we should never stop doing something. Doing something about injustice can't just be a checkbox that we check. It can't be a one-time thing. We can't be the somebody who does something once and never does it again. If we want to be people who show others that God cares about injustice, we have to keep caring. We have to keep acting. We have to keep going. We have to never give up. See, when it comes to injustice, we have to never stop doing something. God calls us to a lifelong attitude of justice and continued action as we live out our faith. We might not be able to change everything, but we can keep doing something. Maybe you're already doing something, or maybe you're not sure where to start. Well, here are a few ways we can all keep doing something about injustice. We can use our voice. We have power in our words. And when we speak up for those who are experiencing injustice, we give people the opportunity to work together. Secondly, we can use our influence. We all have influence. How are we going to use it? How do we use our words? How do we use the people who are our friends? How do we empower people to do more, to work together? We can use our influence. We can use our talent. Now, for me, when I was much younger, that was skateboarding. Skateboarding was something I was good at, and we used it. There was a group of us who went to church together, who skateboarded together, and we used it as a way to tell people about who Jesus was and how he had made a difference in our lives. You can do the same. What is your talent? How does it give you the opportunity to see and be around people who have a different look, have a different way of seeing? How can you use your talent to work against injustice? And lastly, your time. How do you use your time? Do you put time and energy into fighting against injustice? Because when it comes to injustice, never stop doing something. Can you imagine if everyone in this room, if everyone watching this video chose to do something with their voice, to use their talent, their influence, and their time? If we choose to care about and keep fighting against the injustices that we see around us and in the world, I think that it could be a domino effect that would and could change the world. When I think about what could happen, I get excited. I get excited that the change that could happen in the world for the better of everyone in it, we could make a change for the better for everyone in our world, in our school, in our neighborhood, in our family. If we work together, we use our voice, our influence, our talent, and our time, we could do something big about the injustice we see in the world. So as we close, I want you to think about this question. How can you use your voice, talent, influence, or time to do something about injustice?